Welcome back to the Book Log, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about The Green Mile by Stephen King. It's not so often anymore that I get to read a classic Stephen King book for the first time, as in like one of his stories with a huge cultural footprint that everybody knows or at least has heard of. In most cases, including this one, this is due to an incredibly popular movie adaptation, but The Green Mile might be the last one, chronologically, of all of Stephen King's works to have this level of recognition. Stephen King has written several very great books since the time this was written. I think, if anything, this is a product to how our relationship to books and entertainment in general has changed. The position of hegemonically popular author celebrity doesn't really exist anymore, where everything they write has the potential to be like a cultural touchstone. The reason I'm bringing this up at all is because I think The Green Mile is an interesting book to hold this position. It's not like other massively popular Stephen King books. It's not horror. It's not even really a thriller. It's essentially a long, somber reflection on aging and death that is uncharacteristically sentimental, even downright sappy for a Stephen King novel. Even more so, I'd say, than Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption or The Body, which are probably the closest comparisons I can make to this. Another unique thing I should mention about this book is its original serialized format. The story was released in 6 individual segments over the course of 6 months in 1996. Apparently this idea was inspired by Charles Dickens, who often released his books in serialized segments, but also Stephen King was interested in the concept of releasing portions of a book before the whole thing was completed, essentially forcing himself to finish it and to write it in a timely fashion, although I'm not sure that he's ever had trouble with that sort of thing. This may seem trivial, but I do think the original serialized format of this book probably did give it a somewhat different feel as opposed to reading the whole thing at once. The pace is a little bit slower. A lot of elements are repeated or re-summarized throughout, probably to help readers remember details when they hadn't read the previous installment in a month. I think this format just gives the book a bit of a unique texture compared to other Stephen King works. It's a little slower, a little more methodical, a little more plotted, which are all things that I think actually help this book in some ways. Speaking of the story, I should probably talk about it. What is this book about? The Green Mile is told through the perspective of a man named Paul Edgecombe, who is writing down the story of his time as a death row supervisor at Cold Mountain Penitentiary during the 1930s. There's a bit of a framing device here where the narrative moves between Paul's present-day reflections of him living in a retirement home, writing the story and thinking back on these events from the present day, which is the 90s, and then the actual events of the narrative he's telling. His story primarily centers on a time when a new inmate named John Coffey arrives on E Block, which is also known as the Green Mile for the color of the flooring in the hallway leading to the electric chair. Coffey is this giant, towering black man convicted of the brutal rape and murder of 2 young white girls. But almost immediately, Paul senses there's something unusual about him, or that something doesn't quite add up. John Coffey has an incredibly gentle demeanor. He's very quiet. He's always crying. And eventually we learn about his inexplicable ability to heal. As the story unfolds, John Coffey performs several miraculous acts. He cures Paul's painful urinary infection. He resurrects another inmate, Edouard Delacroix's pet mouse, Mr. Jingles, after he got stomped on, which I'll talk about a bit later. His healing process is really fascinating. He's somehow able to breathe in all the toxins or evil or sickness or negativity or whatever the thing he's curing is. He literally inhales it from one body into his own, then exhales the sickness out in the form of a cloud of little black bugs that immediately die, turn white, and then disappear. It's just an incredibly strange and striking visual component to this power, and I love the idea that sickness or pain is a literal physical manifestation inside your body that can be removed. Eventually, he even heals the warden's wife of an inoperable brain tumor in one of my favorite scenes in the whole book, where Paul and the other guard characters, Dean, Brutal, and Harry, have to covertly break him out of the prison in the middle of the night, drive him to the warden's house to do the healing, and then break him back into the prison, all without anyone ever noticing. In addition to all this stuff, there are also some really great classic Stephen King antagonists in this book. You have the other prison guard, Percy Wetmore, who is this whiny, obnoxious, mean-spirited asshole who is just a miserable presence. He constantly acts out, but he's able to shield himself from consequences thanks to some familial connections higher up in the prison hierarchy. I said earlier that this book isn't horror, which which is generally true, but there is one incredibly disturbing sequence in here that I would say veers into horror territory. During the execution of Edouard Delacroix, Percy deliberately neglects to wet the sponge that's meant to conduct electricity into the brain, which ensures a quicker and less painful death. As a result, Delacroix's execution is extremely prolonged and brutal and excruciating. King describes it in such vivid, horrifying detail. Delacroix, shrieking in agony and catching on fire, his eyeballs literally melting out of his head. Possibly one of the most gruesome King passages I've ever read. Percy is ostensibly in a position of authority, someone who's supposed to be one of the good guys, but King, I think, intentionally makes him one of the most cruel characters in the book. Even Delacroix, who is a convicted multi-murderer, is written as having far more empathy and humanity. And while we're on the topic of Delacroix, I should circle back to something I mentioned earlier, which is Mr. Jingles. A surprisingly large portion of this book, especially early on, is devoted to the antics of this literal mouse named Mr. Jingles. He is remarkably intelligent and perceptive for an animal. He plays fetch with a spool. Delacroix is able to teach him tricks. He even apparently holds on to little splinters of spool as souvenirs after Del is gone. At first, I thought it was a bit strange that a mouse plays such a prominent role in a story set on death row, but his presence does tie nicely into a lot of the overarching themes of the book. For one, the relationship between Mr. Jingles and Delacroix forces the reader to humanize Del and see him as a human being capable of affection and tenderness. It's hard not to find it charming how much he cares for this little creature. And then there's the moment when John Coffey heals Mr. Jingles after he's been stepped on by Percy, which is supposed to sort of underscore the compassion and goodness of John Coffey and how he will use his supernatural gift even for the smallest, most vulnerable life, which makes what happens to him even more devastating. And then also there's this idea of events recurring or echoing over time, which kind of ties into the story's outer frame. In the present day scenes at the nursing home, Paul reveals that Mr. Jingles is somehow still alive. He's telling the story to Elaine, who is a fellow resident who feels kind of like a mirrored version of his late wife Janice, and the nursing home even has its own Percy in the form of Brad Dolan, who is a cruel employee who seems to embody the very same kind of annoying sadism. Through telling this story, it's kind of like Paul is reliving the past. He's not able to fully escape everything that happened on the Green Mile. I think this is a very thematic story for Stephen King, so I do want to touch on a couple things in that realm, and I think a good one to start with is this theme of justice and what that really means. At first, the book is painted as this moral dilemma. How could a man who seems so gentle and kind commit such a horrific act? Can people change? Can people atone? If so, should we still kill them? But eventually we learn that John Coffey is actually innocent and has been wrongly convicted. He was found at the scene of the crime, but the reason was because he was actually there trying to heal the two dead girls, not hurt them. Coincidentally, the true killer is William Wharton, or Wild Bill, who is one of the other prisoners on the Green Mile and who is a genuine psychopath. And now John Coffey is scheduled to get executed for a crime he didn't commit, and there isn't anything anyone can do to stop it. For one, there's just too much institutional bureaucracy. Two, the reasons they discovered his innocence are supernatural and too hard to believe. And then lastly, of course, is that John Coffey is black, and it's the 1930s in the American South, so there's a very strong racial component at play as well, where no one wants to see him let free. Human institutions are inherently fallible and cruel, and sometimes justice just isn't possible. There's also an interesting metaphysical, almost spiritual component to this story. Apparently, Stephen King deliberately gave John Coffey the initials JC because he's supposed to function as a sort of Christ figure. He performs miracles, he absorbs others' pain, and he even literally sacrifices his life for a world that doesn't understand him and even condemns him to die. I'm not really sure what to make of that other than to compare that to Paul's situation, which is sort of the opposite. When Coffey healed him, it apparently gave Paul an almost supernatural longevity. He reveals that he's currently 104 years old and that ever since that interaction, Paul has almost never been sick or injured or really harmed in any way. He somehow got a part of Coffey's divine healing power permanently, and the same thing happened to Mr. Jingles, who again somehow lived to be like a 60-year-old mouse. But this doesn't feel like a blessing to Paul. It's more like the weight of the injustice is being foisted upon him for the rest of his long life as a form of penance or something. I really love the closing line of the book, which is, "We each owe a death. There are no exceptions. I know that, but sometimes, oh God, the Green Mile is so long." It's like everyone is walking the Green Mile all the time. That's what living and dying is. I think an underrated aspect to King's writing is the way he's often able to take these really heavy topics and present them in a way that's just so loose and palatable. I just find reading his books so effortless, whether they're on the sillier side of his catalog or, in this case, a profound meditation on life and death and existing in the world. It makes sense that this is one of his most revered novels. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.